Ann Coulter, the author of Demonic: How the Liberal Mob is Endangering America. Ann, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
First of all, you deserve some kind of medal for bringing mob theory back into the public eye, but we need to dig in here, so let's start off with what a mob wants. Here's what you say: the demon is a mob, and the mob is demonic. You say it's intoxicated by messianic goals, the promise of instant gratification, and adrenaline-pumping exhortations. Can you be a little more specific? Is it power, pleasure, death? What does a mob want?
Well, I give approximately 2,000 examples in my book. At the moment, what they want is more treats. Well, there are many things they want, but for example, many more treats from the government. Their Medicare and Social Security, even though the programs are about to go bankrupt. And you do see the classic division between, as I explain it in my book, going back to the American Revolution versus the French Revolution, the liberal mindset and strategies versus the conservative mindset and strategy. You have Republicans out there talking about how it is a Ponzi scheme, these programs. They are literal Ponzi schemes. The money coming in goes directly out to current beneficiaries. This is the Bernie Madoff plan to investment. Current beneficiaries of Medicare get, I think it's about 3 times what they paid into it. This isn't a system that can last, and we're having fewer and fewer people paying in. And the designers of the program
the mob wants goodies then, okay? And you write that the Democratic Party is indeed the party of the mob, party with the goodies, irrespective of what the mob represents. So I get the impression here, you're reading the book, there's no middle ground. You're either with the mob or you're against it, right?
The point is the Democratic Party uses mob tactics, is subjected to mob psychology. You understand the way they argue now, how they talk, instead of responding to claims about the facts, the ineluctable, unavoidable fact that Medicare and Social Security are about to go bankrupt. They show an ad with Representative Paul Ryan pushing an old lady in a wheelchair off a cliff. That is a classic mob gesture. Use images. As Jean-Jacques Rousseau said, the philosopher of the French Revolution, people hear through it's better to appeal to people through their eyes than through their ears. Don't use logic. A mob doesn't understand logic. Use pictures, images. And that's what we've been getting from liberals for 200 years. It's all death to the king and desecrate Notre Dame Cathedral, run around executing priests. And over the American Revolution, the conservative tradition, they're carefully writing up the Declaration of Independence, why they should have independence. And by the way, they did not particularly hate King George. They wanted to be separated from him. They did stage a war against him. But, our founding fathers admitted that the British system was far from the worst in the world. They just wanted separation from England. That's much more akin to today's Tea Partiers who are busily reading the Constitution, seeing that many of these government programs were Ponzi schemes that are about to go bankrupt. And what we get is demagoguery and images and hysterical, agitated demands from the Democrats.
So there's a group of people who aren't on the left, right? People who have a sort of libertarian flavor to them. And I think they look back at a guy like Thomas Jefferson, who you criticize, and you say, this guy was wrong in the French Revolution. And sure enough, he was. But I think for some, more libertarian folk, you look at the lineage that comes out of Thomas Jefferson, and you see a certain ambiguity there. I want to press on that ambiguity. I want to pull another quote here. You quote Michael Oakeshott, which I'm sure will be much to the delight of Andrew Sullivan. You quote him saying, "The conjunction of ruling and dreaming generates tyranny." That's right, of course. But my question is, okay, what causes the mob? What is it that makes it possible? I want to know, for instance, what conditions made the French Revolution something that could even happen in the first place?
Good question. I cite Simon Schama, an historian of the French Revolution. He wrote a terrific book, Citizens, about the French Revolution, and in part he attributes it to the weakening of the morality of French society. He describes, and I quote him on this point, how the pornography started to get particularly ripe during the reign of King Louis XV, the father of Louis XVI, the only French king ever beheaded, and that was during the French Revolution. And of course, Louis XV openly kept a mistress. You know, part of the idea of the monarchy was that the kings were chosen by God. They ruled by divine authority. And when you have your king openly keeping a mistress at Versailles, that is going to start weakening the morals of the country. I think it's something we see and have seen, certainly in my lifetime, from the left in this country, from the Democratic Party, including their reaction to this and that sex scandal, from Dominique Strauss-Kahn, Teddy Kennedy, Bill Clinton, John Edwards. There is an effort to reduce the morals of the people because it's easier to incite a mob when the people have no honor or morals. And that is quite the opposite of the American Revolution, as I make clear in my book. And in fact, on Thomas Jefferson, I don't run him down that much. I do say he was unusual. Unlike many of our founding fathers, he and Benjamin Franklin were the least orthodox Christian. But compared to today's political scene, Thomas Jefferson was a virtual Jerry Falwell. I mean, Mitt Romney's religious beliefs were more unorthodox to the rest of our founding fathers than Thomas Jefferson's were.
That's right. Okay, so the rot starts at the top. That makes a lot of sense to me. But I think for a lot of Americans, they look at the phenomenon of the mob and they say, you know what, this is a European problem, born of European circumstances. You look back in the history, absolute monarchy, serfdom, Catholic power and corruption, you know, troubles that weren't baked into the origins of America. How did we wind up with a homegrown mob?
Great point. Well, for one thing, a lot of European immigrants. You did start to get, I mean, there's always been a mob. I should make that clear. It's like Jesus says of the poor, you will always have them. You will always have mobs. I mean, that was part of that was the concern of the Loyalists, incidentally, the ones who were against the American Revolution, that without the British crown protecting them, that you would have homegrown mobs here in the colonies and the new Confederated States. It was a mob uprising after the Revolution, Shays' Rebellion, that led to the movement for one national government. And the danger of mobs and the reason for creating one national government is talked about throughout the Federalist Papers. You had mob uprisings during the Civil War, of course, always Democrats engaging in hideous race riots in New York City, lynching blacks, dragging them through the streets by genitals. Republican President Abraham Lincoln sends in the troops, crushes the mob, goes back and wins the war, and he goes on to win re-election in the next presidential election, even in New York State. So there have always been mob uprisings. I think it became more common, certainly in the 60s, and as I argue in my book, the civil rights movement gave mobs a halo. For the first time, street protests were being deployed on behalf of a good cause. Of course, Thurgood Marshall, I contrast Thurgood Marshall with Martin Luther King. He was winning, he was redeeming black civil rights the American way. He was bringing lawsuits. He was a smart lawyer, and he was winning his lawsuits. He won Brown versus Board of Education back in 1954. If 4 years later, Nixon had become president rather than JFK, you wouldn't have ever needed a civil rights, the protesting in the streets. And we'd be celebrating Thurgood Marshall Day instead of Martin Luther King Day. But because Kennedy and Johnson were president for the next 8 years, and they were appealing to the racist mob within their party, the same way the Democratic Party appeals to the abortion-mad feminists today. I'm not suggesting that Kennedy himself, though LBJ was a segregationist, but Kennedy certainly was not, and LBJ wasn't once he became president, but that was an element within their party. And so Kennedy and Johnson dragged their feet on civil rights enforcement, unlike Eisenhower and absolutely unlike President Nixon, who desegregated Southern schools in about 1 year of his first term.
Okay, I want to go back to crushing the mob. This is my big question mark coming out of the book. It's a great book. It's a tour de force, but it isn't going to persuade anyone who isn't disposed to it already, right? Here's a quote from you, and I just want to talk about it. You say, "A mob cannot be calmly reasoned with. It can only be smashed. When faced with a mob, civilized society's motto should be overreact." What exactly would smashing today's American mob entail?
Well, I give that in precise detail just a few paragraphs earlier, and pointing out where, and part of the reason for this book is I think Americans have lost their native enmity toward mobs. The country has always understood that mobs are always dangerous things. I think that understanding has weakened, as I say, in part because of the civil rights movement, and now liberals compare, every time they run out on the streets and start smashing Starbucks windows, they claim it's the new civil rights movement. A, it isn't, and B, mobs are always dangerous. For example, when at the Republican National Convention, and this is in the chapter you're citing, that's the last line of the book, at the Republican National Convention, something that is years in the making, costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. When our vice presidential candidate, Sarah Palin, stood up to give her speech, a couple of left-wing lunatics stood up and started screaming and approaching the stage. And you have the alleged, guards at the convention talking into their walkie-talkies and, like Louis XVI, doing nothing, standing frozen like statues as these lunatics approached the stage, disrupting the Republican National Convention. Only 2 newspapers reported it. They did not press charges against the lunatics. They sent them away and said, please don't do this again. Well, they had done it before Sarah Palin's speech, and they did it again the next night. You press charges, you call out the National Guard, you arrest, you fight back when you're physically attacked, as Tim Proffitt did when Rand Paul was rushed at when he just shows up for a Republican debate. It's Tim Proffitt who gets lied about, demeaned, and charges are pressed against him. Well, this career criminal had just run and thrown, hit Rand Paul through the window of his car. He's just showing up for a Republican national debate. I think it's a problem that Republicans are hawks when it comes to the nation's foreign enemies, but doves when it comes to domestic enemies. Mobs can't be reasoned with. They're irrational. They're childlike.
Hey, that guy right there. That guy right there just knocked me over. Every piece of ass. Nice language. Calm down. Just calm down. Everybody calm down, okay?